Hey everyone, it's your favorite host, Marcus Norman of Gentleman Style Podcast Show. Today, we are going to talk about something that's really important. I found this phenomenal woman who is spreading the word on a topic that women have been dealing with for so long. And so some of you all may look at this interview and say to yourselves, why are we talking about IUDs? Well, we need to. This is a pandemic inside of a pandemic. And so I want to shine the light on what this woman's mission and what she's doing. And she's changing lives and helping men and women get educated on something that should have been the forefront of all of our minds. So you won't want to miss 1 second of this powerhouse speaker and what she has to say. Stay tuned, stay with us. Here we go. I have this incredible speaker. Welcome to the Gentleman Style Podcast Show. If you are just tuning in, I have Tamara Wilder. This woman is on a mission. She's on a mission to change the lives and change the mindsets around IUDs. She's the founder of the IUD Awareness Program and Educational Platform, following a devastating response to using a copper IUD for birth control herself. After being told by doctors, so many doctors misdiagnosing her and psychologists not getting to the root of the problem, she had a horrible experience with it and is here to give back today on the Gentleman Style Podcast platform and help us get to a better understanding around this pandemic. With over millions, thousands and thousands of women affected by IUDs every single day, she is shifting the hearts and minds of women across the globe. Help me welcome to the stage, Miss Wilder. Ma'am, you are phenomenal. I thank you for being here on the Gentleman Style Podcast Show. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me, Marcus. It's really a pleasure to be here with you.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to have you. Miss Wilder, ma'am, you are on a mission to change the world. And tell us, what has been your experience? Tell us a little bit about that story. I hovered over it, but I didn't do it any justice. Can you tell us what was your personal experience with an IUD and why you are on a mission today?
Well, thank you very much for asking. The story is a long, complicated one. Anyone who wants to learn the whole thing can go to our website and read all the details. But in a nutshell, I got a copper IUD late in my life in my mid 40s. I was entering menopause and I had always used more natural forms of birth control. My ex husband at the time had had a vasectomy, so I hadn't had to worry about birth control for a while. And when I was dating someone new who did not have a vasectomy, I had to start thinking about it again. And I was encouraged by my naturopath to get a IUD. I did not want to use a hormonal IUD because I had had a bad association with hormonal birth control when I was very young, when I was a teenager. And I chose a copper IUD thinking that it would be the safest thing that I could do. And pretty much right away, it affected my life, but it took my health, my body did not like it. But because I was not being properly informed about what could go wrong or what to look out for, which is what I share with people now, is it took me a good 5 months to even realize, even start to suspect the IUD. And at that time, I was having a massive anxiety breakdown. I was losing all my hair. I was having difficulty thinking. My life had been shattered to bits. My relationship with my partner had been very, very badly affected. And I ended up pretty much becoming fully agoraphobic, living in my parents' house for another 5 months, with my partner contacting me saying, this all started when you got that IUD. Talk to your doctor about it, because he was really, really worried about me. He had been one of the people. This is why it's so important to share this with men. Is he had been one of the people that first saw what was going on with me, even before I really saw it myself. He saw me changing from when I got the IUD, and he told me that I should keep talking to the doctor. And every time I did, they would say, "Oh, there's no way what's happening to you is related. You just need to figure out what's going on in your mind or what you need to fix in your life. This happens to women sometimes. You just have to accept it." And they kept me from getting it out for the next 5 months. And finally, at 10 months, I came across, and I was getting steadily worse. The anti-anxiety meds that they were giving me were not working. You know, I was suicidal. My parents were just completely freaked out. And like I said, I was in my mid 40s when this happened. I am a very, very stable, very grounded individual. And I've never experienced any kinds of anxiety or depression in my entire life. And within 5 months of getting this device, it had taken me down into the huge pit of unable to function. And so, finally, I found an article that made me find a support group, and, in by finding the support group, I realized that what I had been experiencing was not just me, that there were thousands and thousands and thousands of other people's stories identical to mine that felt like they were pages out of my own diary, and so I got the IUD taken out 3 days later, and literally by 20 minutes after having the foreign object removed from my body, I was feeling better. The sun had come out, the black clouds had parted. I felt like dancing. My anxiety was virtually gone. I now believe it was because my body was trying to tell me that it was being poisoned by this object, and I started feeling a lot better. I've gone through a long recovery because it had affected my body in such a dramatic way that there's things that we need to do, and there's things that we can do to help ourselves recover. But basically, things started getting better right away for me, and so I was absolutely sure that it was the IUD. And I started sharing my story. I'm a teacher. I'm somebody who teaches ancient living skills and survival stuff, and I already had a pretty heavy platform on Facebook following me. Which was one reason why my anxiety was so big that I was hiding, because I didn't want people to know what was going on with me when I was sick. But when I started getting better so quickly, I just started sharing my story, and I was astounded at how many people responded back like, "Oh, that's happened to me too. This is," and I realized that it was all IUDs, not just copper IUDs, the hormonal ones as well. And I started realizing that we're told that just this is such a rare thing. That's what the doctors told me. They said, "We're so sorry that you are one of those rare people that had this bad experience, but it really is only you. It's only you. There's hardly anybody else having this happen." But then when I started sharing my story, it was men and women would share stories back at me of either men would share stories of their ex-girlfriends having problems, their wives having problems. They would share stories of their sisters having problems with me. And like I said, a lot of times the men that are in our lives are the people that see it in us before we even see it in ourselves. And then women would always share things. And so I realized that this is not a rare thing. It's just something that is not being talked about, and the stories are not being shared to the level that we can see what's really going on. And so I founded the IUD awareness group. It's a website and a Facebook page, Instagram, Twitter, and then we took over the sponsorship of the IUD side effects support group on Facebook, which had first helped me. And now we host that Facebook support group, which when I first joined almost 7 years ago, we had 1,800 members, and we now have over 37,000 members. And that's just active members. At least that number, or maybe twice that number, have come on our support group, found the answers they needed, recovered, and then moved on. So I believe that our support group has helped at least 100,000 people.
Wow. Wow. So this was not doctors tried to make and psychologists tried to make you feel like you are rare. This isn't the norm. But how many
Exactly.
women have experienced similar? What kind of other experiences have other women faced in these support groups? Are they similar? Are they different?
Oh,
Um,
the anxiety piece, I have a flyer here which sort of shows the extension. So this is the flyer we make that we show people. And these are the early warning signs. So these are the things that all of us are experiencing. And this is the early warning signs that we have identified as the things that we ignored at the beginning. By the time most of us get to the support group, we're in this stage of severe problems. And so these are the things that most of us are having happen to us when we are joining the support group and trying to find the answers. Um, Basically, it's not that all those things happen to any one person. Everybody has their unique cluster of problems, but there are certain things that we see more often, and the ones that are dominating the list when we do little polls on what are your issues, and the ones that dominate the list are always anxiety, depression, and panic attack disorders, so mental disorders. That's one of the biggest things, and I personally believe that's because the IUDs are a foreign object in our body, and our body is, and they work by causing a state of inflammation in our uterus. And our uterus is directly connected to our pineal or pituitary up here. That's something that, it's a connection that we have as females, and when our uterus gets inflamed, our brain gets inflamed, and also our body is, it's our body's trying to tell us something's wrong. Like they're trying to say something's wrong here. You need, that's what the anxiety for me was, is something's wrong. You need to figure it out. But the problem is we're so told that the IUDs are safe. We're told that they're not going to do that to us. That we look outside in the world around us, which is what the psychologist was trying to get me to do, to find the source of our problems, when the source is actually in our bodies, and it's our the anxiety is our body trying to tell us something's wrong. So the other ways our body is trying to tell us something's wrong, the really common things is we start seeing weight gain. Um, Period changes are really common. They actually promote the hormonal IUDs because they most often make your period lessen or go away. So they're actually sold to people as like, this is the way to get rid of your period because this is a better way of being. It's easier, right?
An
But that's
IUD.
actually, yeah, that's why a lot of people get an IUD just to make their periods go away. They don't actually understand why that happens. It used to be it used to be a sign that something was wrong, and they would warn people about it. But now they're actually promoting it on that idea that our IUDs, the IUDs, are going to help you have an easier modern life, that you actually don't have to bleed anymore. But that doesn't always happen. Sometimes periods get heavier on the hormonal IUD. On the copper IUDs, they tend to get heavier and heavier. We're told that, but sometimes they go away on the copper IUDs as well. So period changes are definitely really, really common. Like I said, weight gain issues. It could be weight loss followed by weight gain, which is what happened to me. I was losing weight for a long time, along with the anxiety rising, and then it switched around. Um, the other ones are hair loss and skin issues, so acne, skin rashes, things like that, and hair thinning, hair loss is also another big thing that people talk about.
What's the difference between, why did you choose the copper IUD versus some of the other ones that are available today? What's the difference between?
So the copper IUD is billed as a non-hormonal birth control. So, people are probably familiar with the pill, which is a hormonal birth control. It's people don't understand the pill is actually, it's actually making your body think that you're in menopause, so you don't ever bleed. It's sort of shutting down your entire reproductive cycle, which there are problems with the pill there's a lot of people talking about that now. There's a new video out called The Business of Birth Control, which talks about the whole problems with the pill. And so for that reason, people acknowledge that the pill is also has side effects, and it also is something you have to remember to take every day. And so for that reason, starting in the 70s, they were trying to find a replacement of something that people could use instead of having to take a pill every day. And they came up with the idea of putting a little object, usually they're T-shaped nowadays, in the uterus. And what it does is it causes a state of inflammation. And that state of inflammation is supposed to prevent a fertilized egg, from implanting. So that's what the original ones did. The original one was called the Dalcon Shield, and it was only about inflammation, and caused a bunch of problems in the 70s. It actually was the biggest class action lawsuit in U.S. history. The people that made the original Dalcon Shield IUD went bankrupt, or one of their shell companies went bankrupt, because they were making a lot of people really sick. And so IUD sort of got put on the back burner for a while, but they were brought back in the mid 80s. And when they brought them back, they tried to change them from the inflammation only aspect of birth control, which wasn't working very well. So they wanted to introduce something that would prevent pregnancy better. And so they came up with the idea of wrapping a copper wire around the IUD in order to create a toxic environment in the uterus. And so that combination of inflammation and copper in your womb is supposed to prevent implantation, and it's supposed to kill the sperm and not let them even fertilize an egg. And then if they do fertilize an egg, it's supposed to prevent implantation of the egg in the uterus, because it causes this horrible state, like a bad environment. So those were the original ones. The original one was called the Copper 7, and then they changed it into the Copper T, which is also now called the Paragard. But then when they were bringing them back in the 80s and the early 90s, they also said, "Well, we know so much about hormones now. Let's see if we can get away from the copper and make the IUD be a combination of the pill and an IUD." And so what they do is they take the same hormones that are in birth control pills and they put them into a piece of plastic that's a little T-shaped plastic device. And that's basically a hormone emitter, a birth control emitter. And it's now inserted into your uterus. So it causes that state of inflammation. But instead of the copper being there to kill the sperm and prevent implantation, they have the hormones there. So the hormones then affect your body and are basically giving you the pill every single day. So it emits a little bit of all of that birth control hormonal stuff into your body. And that's why the hormonal IUDs are shorter lived. Like they keep changing it, but they're between like 3, depending on the size, to 7 or 8 years. Where now the copper IUDs, they say that you should keep them in for like 9 to 12 years now. And so there's a big confusion about those among even people that use IUDs. The hormonal ones are shorter lived. You need to replace them more often because they do stop working when the hormones run out. But the copper IUDs pretty much are told that they can stay in for a very long time, which the longer they're in your body, the bigger the chances of other problems happening. So, it's 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 something that we go through when you have to replace them.
Right. I got asked the question, Marcus, why are you having a discussion around IUDs? Why? And quite simply, you said it earlier. The reason for this is because I want to spread awareness, especially to our men, how what we're doing to our women. It's important. This is important information for women to be aware of, but it's also important for men to be aware of this because oftentimes we look to our partners and we say, hey, we're not ready. We have the discussion, we're not ready for children right now, and then up comes the topic of birth control and the various forms that it has. And so we need to know, men, we need to know what you are doing to your women. We need to know what we're causing to our women when we encourage them or ask them to do this to their bodies. And so that's why I wanted to have this interview. And this is why I begged and pleaded with Miss Wilder to be on the show, because this is important. It's so, so important. Miss Wilder,
Yeah.
what are your thoughts around this? Has been a topic for of discussion for a while, but this is kind of hand in hand with abortion and the new
Mhm.
law making it illegal for abortion. What are your thoughts on the matter? What are your thoughts on the topic of abortion?
Um, that's a very personal answer for me. If I'm
Right.
saying that, I'm not representing IUDawareness.org because, and on our support group, don't we don't allow the topic of abortion on our support group because it's about recovering from an IUD, and we're giving alternatives to birth control. And even though some people do view abortion as a form of birth control, it really isn't a form of birth control. In relation to IUDs, there are times, so in with especially with the early IUDs, science wasn't advanced enough yet. So my own mother was given the Dalcon Shield, and this was something that I hadn't realized when I got my own IUD. That she and we, it's a discussion we've had now. She had the Dalcon Shield, and since it didn't work very well to prevent pregnancy, she got pregnant on the IUD, and her doctors told her that she needed to have the IUD removed, which would induce a miscarriage. So essentially, she had an abortion because she had to get this thing out of her. Because the thing about IUDs as well is they do not prevent pregnancy as well as they are touted to, and especially the ones in the 70s did not. And if you do get pregnant with an IUD, number one, there's a greater chance of it being an ectopic pregnancy, because if the IUD is in the womb, is creating the bad environment in the womb, the egg will try to travel somewhere else and it will go up the fallopian tube and it will implant there, and it'll be a pregnancy, but it will be a pregnancy that will kill the person that is pregnant because it's not in the uterus, it's not where it's supposed to be. So that ectopic pregnancy is a life-threatening situation that has to be taken care of through surgery. And so that's something that one of the IUDs do. But if the IUD does implant in the uterus and it is not an ectopic pregnancy, which requires that that surgical intervention happens, it's not a viable pregnancy at all, and it's life threatening. But if it does implant in the uterus, the IUD is still in there, and so it's something that's called a high risk pregnancy. So people now with modern things are able to bring babies to term and have healthy babies with IUDs, but sometimes the IUD is in the baby's body, or sometimes it's like the IUD will be the baby will be born holding the IUD in their hand, or it'll be in their skin, or it'll be implanted in some part of their body, and so it can cause a lot of problems. And so when you get pregnant with an IUD, it's a big decision to make, to decide whether you want to remove the IUD, which most likely will cause a miscarriage, or if you want to take the baby to term with the IUD in there, with the chance that things could be potentially really problematic with that baby's life. So for that reason, you know, abortion is something that I feel like needs to be a choice, especially for somebody who gets pregnant with an IUD, because that's, it is a high risk pregnancy. There could be a lot of dangers to the mother and a lot of dangers to the baby, and a lot of a high risk of a baby being born with a lot of problems that they're going to deal with throughout their entire life. So I feel like women's choice is really important, especially in that level. And personally, on my level, I am very pro-choice. I think that we need to be able to have control of our own bodies, and the need for birth control is really important, especially if that option is being taken away from people. But I feel like we're also being sort of told that we have to do these changes in our bodies to avoid getting pregnant, when the truth is there's very effective, safe, and natural ways to avoid pregnancy. It isn't a choice of, you either have to be able to get an abortion, you have to take a birth control that's going to alter your body, or you're going to get pregnant. That is not the truth that we're being told. The way that we as women have prevented pregnancy for ages is through cycle tracking and through what's called fertility awareness methods. And that's what we really need to talk about if we're wanting to empower people to not get pregnant and not need abortions in the first place.
That makes sense. So there
Yeah.
are healthier alternatives to an IUD. There are better options other than an IUD. And you said this earlier, an IUD doesn't necessarily prevent pregnancy, but that's the total reason for why we get it in the first. Well, before it was educated to prevent your period, to stop the period altogether. But
Yeah.
now it's not a foolproof plan to actually prevent pregnancy, is what you're saying.
Yeah. Well,
Wow.
so the history in there is very interesting. So the IUDs at the beginning, when they were just inflammation-based IUDs, they were meant to minimize pregnancy. And the main places in the world that they were being used in the 70s was in third world countries, in populations of people of color. So they were a birth control thing. It was a eugenesis based method. The people who first brought out the IUDs were eugenicists, and they were using this as a way to control populations, world populations. So and it was in the inner cities of the United States and of Europe, as well as in other countries of the world. So there's a whole really dark history there that needs to be explored for anybody who's looking into it. So they weren't actually telling people that they would 100% prevent pregnancy. They were inserting the devices in women and hoping that it would minimize the number of children they had. And so the way the history went is that in the 70s, when the birth control pill came out and women's liberation movement happened and people were empowered, they started looking and saying, well, if you're giving these devices to all these people in other countries, why can't we have them? But in order to market them to American women on a large scale, they needed to make them work better. They needed to be able to guarantee that it wouldn't get you pregnant. And so that's when they started adding the copper, and then, and started coming up with or increasing the inflammation status. And that's when all the ones in the 70s happened. And and there were lawsuits. Like I said, there was lawsuits against the copper 7 as well, and they took it off the market. And then they sort of waited for a generation to go away, and they came back 15 or 20 years later and said, oh, we've made these ones so much better, which was true. They made them not as causing inflammation, and they made them a little bit cleaner, so they weren't causing pelvic infection as much as the early ones had been caused. And then by adding the hormones, they were saying they're going to be more effective. And so there is some truth to what they're saying, but they're not telling the whole truth. And so it always, in the beginning, it was for birth control. That was their main reason. And in the 80s, when they started, it's now that they're using them, not in the old days. It's now that they're using them to prevent periods. Like, that's why they're being promoted right now. And then the other thing they're using them now is when they've used the hormonal IUDs, they it's the Mirena, the Laletta, the Kylena, the Skyla is the one for young girls. This was another thing, is that in the beginning they would never give IUDs to anybody unless they had already had a baby, because they knew that there was a risk of infertility with that. And so in the old ones in the 70s, it was always like, oh, if you've had one or two babies, we'll give you the IUD, because they knew of this infertility risk. With the resurgence in the 80s, they're now promoting them to women that have never had kids. In the beginning, with the Mirena and with the Paragard, it was only to adults, so you needed to be over 21. But now they've made the Skyla and the ones that are for younger girls, and so they're giving them to girls as young as 15 and 16 years old. And then because there's the scare about girls being more sexually active younger, they're even, some people are demanding their doctors even give them to their children at 13 and 14. And so there's a and then the idea that they're stopping periods. It's this whole new thing that's happening. So it's being used by a much younger population of women, and the effect that we're seeing on our younger generation of daughters is really, really dramatic. Because for me, it was hard enough as an adult to have my mind change and realize and have anxiety come in, but I cannot even imagine as a 15 or 16-year-old, when you're just growing up, when your hormones are just coming online, and when you're just realizing what it is to be an adult, to simultaneously have an anxiety condition, like on top of one you might already have or just develop, and you just think that's part of being an adult. And so that's part of why we need to be telling everybody about this, of all genders, is that you need to watch out for what's going on with your daughters. And if you see these kinds of changes, if they're using birth control, especially an IUD, but any of them, and you see these kinds of anxiety changes, behavioral changes, look at the birth control first, before you put them through a whole bunch of other things, because the birth control is most likely the cause. If it's not the entire cause, it's causing the imbalance that's causing the other things to happen.
Miss Wilder, y'all. We are going to go to a quick commercial break. Don't go anywhere. Stay tuned. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Good day, podcast listeners. This is your boy, Marcus Norman of Gentleman Style Podcast Show. I wanted to let you guys know that we will be rolling out a new feature and adding a join sponsor button next to the subscriber button here at the bottom of your screen. Once you click the button, it will display 3 membership levels. Gentleman Gentry, which is our entry level, Duke Duchess, which is our season level, and the Emperor and Empress, which is our most sophisticated level, which you will receive unique perks and benefits at each differing level and gain access to our community tab. We will also be sharing polls, upcoming events, and interviews, as well as receive feedback from our sponsors directly. Your support helps me find new and exciting guests to bring to the stage live. Well, in order to get the higher end speakers, it requires, some, you guessed it, money. So thank you for tuning in to my channel. And if becoming a sponsor sounds good to you, then select the join button below and choose your desired sponsor level. Let's continue to grow and serve the future of generations of men and women to come. Love you guys. Bye. We have the incredible Miss Wilder on the Gentleman Style Podcast Show, spilling the tea on IUDs. And she is educating us. She's taking our minds to a whole nother level, and the side effects and the negative experiences that many thousands upon thousands of women have faced and experienced with these IUDs. And there's various forms of them. And on her website, on her company website, she explains this, and she has support groups for this. Miss Wilder, what are some ways that women who've already been affected? We've talked about IUDs, but what are some of the things women can do who've already been affected by IUDs to get help? And what can they do today?
The biggest thing is go to the website and start exploring it. And if you are sort of suspecting that you have an issue, by reading the stories, you'll probably get reinforced and realize that this probably is what you've been experiencing. But if you are looking to interact with people, there's resources on the website. There's healing style. There's more support groups. There's lots of options for figuring out what's going on and for recovering your health. But the biggest thing that I can say is the thing that I feel like quite literally saved my life is joining our IUD side effects support group on Facebook. So there are now over 37,000 members there. Most of them that are there are staying to help share with the new people. Although we did have the way you found me, Marcus, is we had a post go viral on Facebook. I don't know if anybody has seen it. It's this one right here, and it's reached almost 11 million people and been engaged in by 2.25 million people. And in that time, I believe we've had almost 20,000 people join our support group since that post went viral. So we were sitting, at like 25,000 people, 30,000, for a while, and then we had 30,000, and now we've had 37,000. And so it's really getting the word out there. And that support group is where we're sharing personal experiences. People are sharing their stories about what has helped them, and having a community when this kind of a thing is happening to you. You feel like you're very alone. You feel like you're one of the only people in the world that this is happening to you, and it's a very confusing thing. And when you join the support group, you realize that you are not alone, that there are thousands of us out there, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of us out there that have gone through the same things and come out the other side. So the discovery that this is connected to your health problems is the number one thing. The number two thing is to find the support you need. And then the first step is to get the IUD removed if you are suspecting that it is the problem, because that will tell you, like, sometimes changes don't happen quickly. Sometimes you go through worse times afterwards, but the majority of the people on our support groups see some sort of improvement after removal. And then you go through the roller coaster of getting back in balance once that's happened. But at least you really know that that is the root cause. And then you can, through the information shared on the support groups and on the website, you can do the work to try to get your body back in balance. Because I haven't mentioned this yet, but even though the copper IUD is considered to be a non-hormonal IUD, which is why I got it, because I didn't want to do hormones. It's still, the copper has a direct effect on the hormonal balances of our body. And so even though it doesn't contain hormones, through its stimulation of the development of progestins, sorry, not progestins, through the developments of prostaglandins in our body, it affects the hormonal balances of our body. So we can have all of the same considered things that are, quote, hormonal reactions to a copper IUD. The way I like to say it is that we all get to ultimately to the same place. If we have a copper IUD, we get there by a slightly different route. But if we have a hormonal IUD, we also get to the same place of having metal imbalances and copper toxicity in our body, because the hormones foster a state of metal and copper toxicity, and the copper gives you the state of copper toxicity, but also fosters a state of hormonal imbalance. So we all ultimately are suffering from the same cluster of problems, even though everybody's individual story is slightly different.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Miss Wilder, you've shared so many nuggets this episode. Any final nuggets, any words of wisdom that you'd like to share with the young girl out in the audience who is already using an IUD or on the verge of using an IUD? Any final thoughts or golden nuggets you want to share to that young girl in the audience?
Absolutely. The biggest thing is to listen to your body, and this is for anyone. And also realize that, especially for young people, you might think that the way that you're being told to prevent pregnancy is what we have been doing for generations, and it's not. It was only in the 70s that these were started. They did not keep going with them. It's only been since the 80s that these have been even more widely used, and they're really only spreading to be as dominant of a birth control right now. I fully understand that places like Planned Parenthood, they're pretty much only pushing IUDs now because they think they are the holy grail of birth control. And for some people, they might work. It's possible that people can come through it. But the doctors that are really looking at it are saying that it's not a matter of if something is going to happen, it's a matter of when. And on our support group, some people are on our support group and they say, absolutely loved my IUD for 3, 4, 5 years. And that's a common refrain that we hear from people. So they do seem to work for some people for a while. For me personally, it didn't work from the very beginning, and that is also a common story. But for some people, they loved them for years and then this is the way the stories always go, until one day something changed. And now I started, and usually when that something changes, it's a cascade of problems that continue to get worse. And it's very confusing, it's very problematic, but the IUD is ultimately the cause. and it can take a while to figure that out, especially if you've had one for a while, and getting it removed is the way to see. And if you get it removed and nothing changes and you give it some time and you come to the conclusion that it wasn't the IUD, then you can always get another one in. There's just an expense that's happened there. There's nothing dangerous about taking an IUD out. They're made to be removed and put back in. So, or a new one put back in. And so, it's the first step that you take to listening to your body and seeing what's going on. Ask people, ask other people in your families, ask older women in your communities, and see if they have any of their own personal stories to share, because most likely they will, and most of them will be negative. It's just not talked about, but if you actually ask the questions, you will find it. And then do the research, find out about fertility awareness methods of birth control. There's a book called Taking Charge of Your Fertility by Toni Weschler, and her name is Toni, and her last name is Weschler. It's her book is the Bible of tracking your cycles using scientific proven methods that are very effective at preventing preventing pregnancy. But beyond that, they are also very proven scientific methods that keep us in touch with our bodies. Because as females, we have this thing called the fifth vital sign, which our periods are our sign of health. It's something that we are sort of given as a way to keep track of our health. And if we track our body, if we track our cycles, if we track our periods, we understand what's going on in our bodies. They actually keep us in tune with our health. It's not just for birth control, but it's a thing that we can use through our entire life to see how we're doing. And we can get signs of disease later on in our life that help us see that something's out of balance, that we might be getting sick earlier than we would see in other ways. And then also, if we have our partners who want to be involved in this, to make fertility awareness methods work really, really well, they take self control. They take knowing when to not have sex, essentially, or when to not have unprotected sex, essentially, because they tell us when we're fertile. That's what their job does, is they are a tool that allows us to track our bodies and know our cycles. They tell us about when we might be feeling low energy certain times of the month. They tell us about that we might be really creative certain times of the month, and they tell us when we're going to be fertile, and they're going to tell us when we're going to bleed. And they're a great way of staying in tune with our bodies. But the way they actually work the best for birth control is if our partners are involved in it as well. So very often, male partners will, or female partners even, but like if you're trying to track, but male partners will do the charting. So if you take your temperature every morning, then your partner can chart, and then they will understand your cycle just as well as you. And then they will also be aware of when the window of fertility is. And if your partner and you both know that your window of fertility is in this certain thing, and it's only around 8 days of every month. That's what people don't realize, is we're giving ourselves these things that are altering our body and threatening our health because we're worried about 30 days of the month, when we only have to be worrying about the fertility in 8, sometimes 10 days of the month. That's the window we're worrying about. And so if our partners understand when that window is, and they are aware that we all need to have self-control during those 8 days, then we as teams can prevent pregnancy and or get pregnant when you want to. It's also a tool for getting pregnant when you are intending to. And so fertility awareness methods, tracking, cycle tracking, things that are not just the calendar method. They're not just doing the old style thing of, trying to figure it out. They're actually very scientific, and you can really track your bodies and get your partners involved. And they are a powerful tool for taking charge of your health and your fertility, and not having to threaten or endanger your health doing things to your body that maybe it really doesn't like having done to it, or having things put inside of it.
Miss Wilder, you have been phenomenal this episode. I thank you for taking time out of your busy day to be here. This has been epic. The information, the nuggets you've shared, and like I said, I needed this to go out because I need our men to be aware of the harm we are causing our women, what we are doing when we ask our women, the people that we love, to do this. So thank you for the mission that you're on, and what you're doing is so, so important. Don't ever quit. We need you.
Thank you very much for giving me the space and for sharing the story. And good luck to everybody out there who's trying to move forward with their lives.
Absolutely. And how can we connect with you? How can we learn more again?
IUDawareness.org. there's everything you need to find out on the website.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, Ms. Wilder. This is huge. Huge, huge, huge. I hope this helps. And thank you, my audience, for tuning in to the Gentleman Style Podcast Show. I hope this was helpful. I hope this was informational. And I hope this brings awareness to something that is truly important. You saw it. You saw the numbers earlier. If you missed it, 10 million viewers, 10 million engagements, 10 million women who are affected or aware or trying to get education on something that isn't discussed about, is not talked about, is not educated on. Even doctors and psychologists aren't even privy to this information. So get ahead of the game and protect yourselves. And men, protect our women by getting educated and being concerned and being engaged with them. So I love this. I love this.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you all for tuning into the Gentleman Style Podcast Show. I hope you all enjoyed this. I have to let her go. She has an organization to run, and she has many more women to engage and help bring to the light. So thank you all for tuning into the Gentleman Style Podcast Show. I hope this served you. Like I always end every show, take care of your friends, take care of your families, and always, always take care of business. This is Marcus, your favorite gentleman of the Gentleman Style Podcast Show, and Tamara Wilder of IUDawareness.org. Check her out. All right. Love you guys. Bye.